Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of our research circle. And today we're going to be talking to Dr. Emmanuel Brunet-Jailly from the School of Public Administration. And so thank you so much, Emmanuel, for joining us today. You're a professor in the school, are you not?
I'm a professor in the School of Public Administration.
Yeah, we're hoping that you could talk to us today about a little bit about your research. But my first question is, how would you describe your research to, say, your next door neighbor?
Yeah, so maybe before I answer the question, I would say that I speak from the unceded Songhees land, and I'm very grateful to live where I live. I feel extremely lucky. My research is about borders and frontiers, borderlands and boundary lines. And very often when I talk to my neighbors, I say to them, I study borders and I look at issues of security, but that's not all that I do look at. I look at different manifestations around borders. I look at, for instance, cultural issues and how state boundary lines have divided the culture and the population that very often straddle boundary lines. It's a huge issue, obviously. And it's an issue that still kills people today around the world. And there are some regions of the world where boundary lines and the border regions around the boundary lines are actually really dangerous. They are military zones. It's not just, the well-known, for instance, North Korea, South Korea, but it's, for instance, most of the borders around India in South Asia, right, where the tension and relationship with other states, not just Pakistan, have never been very, very good. And there are also other places in the world where you have such issues, where historically populations have lived and have had their own culture and language, obviously, and religion, and so on and so forth. And then because of colonialism, they have been divided into smaller pieces, and sometimes forcefully, very often forcefully, obviously, but also to this day, they're struggling to be recognized. And then the other thing that I look at, which is also a manifestation of the bordering process, is the borders of free trade and markets. Because one of the issues with mobility, it's like what can move around the world. One of the big issues about mobility is that we have developed technologies to, in a way, create goods, assemble goods along the production chains, and we also border those, right? So there are certain goods that have the ability to basically be sold on certain markets and other goods can't. And the issue with these technologies is once they start being used, and they have started being used for human beings, they organize the mobility of human beings in a very different fashion. And so these are the two areas where most of my research has focused on. And I don't do research just on Canada or about our country, but I look at these different phenomena really around the world. I have, for the last 7 years and for the next 7 years, I should say actually for the last 8 years and the next 7 or 8 years, I have studied this transformation on the different continents, and I have worked with up to 25 research clusters, 10 in Canada and 15 outside around the world on most continents but Africa. And now only 11 clusters, but with clusters in Africa. And I have colleagues who are working with me to try to understand, just, I guess, the role of states, the role of private actors, the role of other organizations, non-profits, citizen groups, indigenous population. Obviously, indigenous people everywhere suffer because of this situation. And it's not just what we hear in the media. It's not just, Palestine and the Middle East. It's when you look at the details, for instance, across Asia or in Latin America, it's endless. Yeah, so most of my research is really about trying to understand how the world we live in a way, moves slowly because of this phenomenon. The fact that states, for instance, keep on expanding in numbers, right? End of Second World War, 50 years ago, you had about 60 states in the UN, in the United Nations, and today you've got almost 200. You've got 22 different territories that are not recognized today in the United Nations, but they have all been recognized by at least one member of the United Nations. So this is space that moves, right? It is local communities that are asking for control over their own land. And so the new research program now looks at this within states and across states. And so Canada will be obviously one place where we'll do lots of research. I work with a network of scholars here at UVic, led by Jeff Contassel and other colleagues, but I can't cite them all because there are 63 of them. But Jeff and I have thought about this, and we think we need to look at culture and nationhood, forms of nationalism, and how these have developed across the world, not just in Canada, but so that we can echo and compare these situations, not just in the Western world, but also in the South of the world. And also I have, within that same team, I have a bunch of colleagues who are going to look at the role of technology in controlling mobility much more. Because with biometry, for instance, and pre-clearance, we can basically decide who travels or who doesn't travel at all, right? And so it becomes really, really important too. And one of the things we do is we discuss this with big agencies in the public sector and the private sector. So I work, for instance, we work with the World Customs Organization, but also with federations of indigenous nations. And so, it's all of this work comes together. And yeah, that's kind of the way I would describe it over a long conversation with my neighbor. My neighbor actually is a developer and he knows the work I do quite well.
Wow. You must work with some really, just people working in some really fascinating and really diverse situations and contexts. I mean, that must be really interesting work. I mean, I'm just thinking about working with people all over the world. So, what inspired all of that? It's clear that you're passionate about it, but how did you get inspired to do this kind of work?
So I think it's because methodologically, I'm really interested in comparative public policy, comparative studies, and comparative research. And I also believe that we need to work across transdisciplinary approaches in research because it creates much more knowledge. And so I've always been drawn towards these these two factors, if you want, one being a comparativist, the other one wanting to work across very, very different methodological perspective and trying to have important discussions. So how do you bring people who work on database and people who are historians by training, for instance, people who do, mathematics or knowledge science, for instance, and people who do documentation, and or economists, for instance, and people who work on regulation. So people who work with econometrics models, and people who actually do law library research, for instance. And so they look at regulatory systems and legal systems. And so what I try to do is I try to work with people who are interested in this, in a way, in the similar approaches, or at least, and I have obviously, like me, been trained in one discipline. My discipline of training is, political science, but political economy within political science. And then I read a lot in international studies and international relations and European politics and so on and so forth, all around the things that I thought were really interesting, which is originally was cross-border cities, which is quite grounded in a way. But then I was drawn to meet people and discuss with them, I guess, more ambitious research programs that would basically look at the world overall and look at these different manifestations on the different continents. And we find very different situations, but we also find that there are common traits. And so that's a big debate between, I would say, the people who work with me within the team, but also with the rest of the disciplines. Is maybe sometimes people think that we're too comparativist, or that we are too, drawn, or I guess we become methodologically thin because we do a lot of, we have lots of people and teams who are transdisciplinary. But these two factors have drawn my research and my passion. And I have no regrets in doing this, because this is, as I said, you find some commonalities, but you also find some interesting differences. And I think that for major agencies, for governments, for the public and private sector, for nonprofits, for civic activists, understanding in a way, I guess, how wholesome the world is very important. And so when you look at the world overall, you end up saying, well, these are all the different situations that we know, and you can find some new ones, but you know what, it's limited. And how do we take care of that? So it has some implications, for instance, with regard to traditional understanding of borders and boundary lines, and much more progressive, or much more more recent, but also much more challenging understanding. For instance, when we talk about ecological frontiers, what are the ecological frontiers of life on Earth, right? Yeah. So I've worked with colleagues who work on this, and yeah, that's the way I've developed, and I love doing this. It drives me. I don't know why.
Well, isn't that what we all hope for, right? Is to have work that we find satisfying and motivational. That's amazing. So you work with grad students, and yep. I'm just curious about, just after the number of years that you've been doing this, and what's the advice that you usually give to students in terms of just motivating them to get involved in research or follow their passion around research?
I think they have to do research on things that they believe are really important. Yeah. I kind of fell in the soup, right? I kind of thought one day when I in my 20s, I was thinking, borders in Europe are a real problem. Local communities across the border can't go to work back and forth. It's continually a problem, and yet businesses need them. And then, you had also, I discovered that, for instance, you have local languages, and people have spoken these languages for generations, and the states are completely ignoring them. And then the school system in the 1900s in Europe came in and decided that they'd move the school away from the border, and so you had kind of educational regions that were kind of clearing up the borderlands, and the borderlands were used for military purposes as kind of buffer zones. And so when you discover this. And when when I discovered these things, I was working for the French government in the area of economic development, which is very, very different. But I thought it was just fascinating to look at this and to think, we don't have enough people studying borders. We should study them more. It's a very important state policy. You don't have state sovereignty without, well-defined and recognized borders internationally. So the whole exercise of sovereignty, the whole exercise of state violence really relies on this. And so this is the core. So what do I tell my students? I tell them, you really need to be convinced the way I am that, there is something in that research, and that any aspect of it is a good point of entry. So I have postdoctoral students, I have doctoral students who have really very varied interests. I have, for instance, right now, I have a doctoral student who's really interested in indigenous population across the Canada-US border, and has done an MA on this, and has, a huge experience in this area. And I have another PhD student who just arrived at UVic in the fall, and who is studying issues of biometric border security, which is much more technical and much more about, how do you basically filter and control human mobility around the world. And he's really, really interested in comparing the US, Canada system with the European systems. And he's done field work for his MA already in 2 different locations on both continents, and now he wants to do more. And I have also a PhD student from the University of Geneva, and I kind of work with him through his committee, through his PhD committee, and I offered him to work. So he's worked with me now 3 years, who is a specialist of legal systems and how legal systems basically organize and implement and, make it, in a way, make it legitimate, but also kind of create the state system, and how it's then enforced, and how these regulations can then, how do you theorize the law that allows for transnational systems to work, not just international. So it's like, anyway, so I have students who do these very different kind of research. I have also a student who works on protests in border regions. And so they all have these different areas, and I encourage their research, because I think they all contribute some knowledge to the field, and I push them to theorize as much as possible, but I also push them to know their field work extremely well. And then they can start working across teams, and they can get involved with sometimes a little less grounded ideas, or more comparative ideas, but it's, a step at a time. But the basis is to have a passion for something. And what's amazing is that because they are so grounded and so interested in their own area, well, they keep me on my toes, because they will be so knowledgeable about their own domain. And so I have to be also quite knowledgeable about this. And I really love this. I think it's kind of a healthy relationship when you're able to help students actually grow their area. You have a broader perspective, like I've grown to have over the years. But at the same time, I have them with me, reminding me of, the field work that they've done, the discovery that they see, the interviews that they've done, the data that they've put together, and so on and so forth. So that's why being a prof is probably the best job in the world.
Yeah.
Or one of the best ones.
Yeah, I think most of us feel that way. Well, thank you so much. I don't know if Kathy told you, but we do have a little surprise question for you. Just so people can get to, it's just sort of a silly question. We're just asking everyone that we talk to a different surprise question. So the question for you today, if you choose to answer it, is which animal are you most afraid of?
Afraid of? Ha.
Any animal at all?
I was raised pretty rough partly on the farm in France. And so there were lots of animals that I didn't treat very well as a kid. And I'm ashamed of it today, because, I have a dog now at home, and I realize that I've never been as kind to an animal as to this dog. Yeah. And what comes back to you when you're kind to an animal, like a domesticated dog, it's amazing, right? Yeah. I think the animals I dislike the most are probably snakes. Mm-hmm. Especially, I mean, I don't dislike all the snakes, but when I was a kid and a young, a teenager, they were, where I spent my time, they were poisonous, venomous snakes that could kill you. I really didn't like them. And I've killed some of those, I have to admit.
Yeah.
As a young boy with my brother, we were pretty rough. But, we knew them and they were quite dangerous. So,
yeah.
So there you go, a snake.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, mine are rats, and I have killed a couple too, so don't feel too bad. And I lived on a farm as well. I think it's just the nature of farm kids. You live pretty close to animals, and so it's not the same as it is now.
Yeah, my grandparent generation, not my parents, but my grandparent generations were really tough with animals. They, my grandfather hunted, and I knew how to trap birds and foxes and hares when I was, I don't know, 10, 12 years old. So it was part of the culture. And I've lost all of this now. I mean, I still know how to do the traps, but I would never, I think my own kids would never forgive me if I did anything like this. And I don't feel like it. Like, I have a completely different view. I want to, I defend animals. I think we have human beings have been terrible. And so we have so much work to do in this area. So.
Yeah, we can be wonderful and we can be terrible.
Pretty awful.
Well, thank you so much, Emmanuel. It was like really great talking to you. I'm really happy to hear a little bit more about your research. I mean, I was familiar with a lot of the work that you did, but it sounds like you're having lots of fun. Hi, folks. And today we're going to be talking with Shoukia van Beek, who is doing some work with Dr. Emmanuel Brunet-Jailly. And welcome, Shoukia. I'm really happy to meet with you today. Would you mind just introducing yourself to folks, just maybe, what you're doing here at UVic, where you're from, what your area of research is?
Sure. So my name is Shoukia van Beek. I'm a second-year PhD student under the supervision of Emmanuel Brunet-Jailly, working within the BIG lab, so the Borders and Globalization lab, really focusing kind of on international borders and all the kind of related instances that come along with that.
Mm. And so what particular kind of work are you doing with Dr. Brunet-Jailly?
Yeah, so I see my research really as it's pretty interdisciplinary. I see kind of falling at the intersections of political ecology, border studies, and really Indigenous sovereignty and law. And so something I really enjoy about working with Emmanuel is the ability to kind of be interdisciplinary and kind of piece together my project and really pull up parts that really make it, I think, connect really well. Particularly, I work with Indigenous nations whose traditional territory is bisected by international borders. And I look at how borders operate within a settler colonial construct. So being able to kind of pull from different areas and different disciplines that really suited really works well for my project.
That sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and so what part of your work do you find most interesting? Like, what do you like best about the kind of work that you're doing?
I think to me, what's most rewarding about my work is definitely the relationships. Coming into my PhD, I was able to, I started my master's, I did my master's elsewhere, but Emmanuel took me on and I'm able to kind of continue doing similar work and maintaining those relationships and building those relationships within community. So to me, I think that should be working with Indigenous communities, those should be the first priority, but it's also what kind of brings me a lot of joy in my life. It just, my work and my personal life kind of come together in this really beautiful way through those connections. So I think to me that's what I really enjoy the most, what I find the most rewarding, most interesting is learning and meeting a bunch of new people.
That sounds fascinating. That sounds like fun and interesting work. Yeah, and relationships are so important in research, aren't they?
Totally, yes.
but they can also be challenging. What part of your work do you actually find most challenging?
I think to me, what is most challenging sometimes is institutional timelines. I'm definitely not the first to make this connection. There's lots of work by other folks who are much more ahead of things and much brighter than I am, but kind of sometimes the disconnection between what the university expects in terms of timelines and what communities expect in terms of timelines, and what even a commitment to community can look like within those timelines can become difficult or create obstacles or barriers. So working together and kind of figuring out ways to adjust or how to work within or through those systems is something that I thought a lot about.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. Many of us have been dealing with those challenges for.
Yeah, I'm certainly not the first.
Yeah, well, but I mean, it's great to face those challenges when you're earlier on in your career, because you can develop ways, to your point, strategies that you can work with communities about, working through those challenges and educating the academy about the realities of working in community, right? In the timelines, yeah.
Mhm.
So, so you're going to be completing
Absolutely.
your degree in a couple of years, I guess, ish. No pressure.
Yeah.
But
Thank you.
if you had your, if you had your wish, like, and not thinking about money or geography, what would you like to be doing when you're finished your degree?
I think, again, like my project right now is kind of a continuity of what I've previously been doing. I've been invested in it for a number of years now. And so I think my like dream after I graduate, I really see it as like as a collaborative work. And it's really driven by my values and by my relationships. So I would love to see some positive outcome, like some sort of impact of my research. Maybe that's a little hubristic, but I would love to see it. I love the idea of like research for good and what the academy can do for good. And so I think that seeing some sort of just some sort of like positivity come from my work that I've done with other people would really bring me a lot of joy.
And are you hoping for an academic career? I mean, is your plan to go into academia?
I hope so. Yeah, I'd like to continue doing this research. I don't know that it's something where I don't necessarily. If there's an end, that's a good thing. If there's an end to this research, that means that that something good has changed. So
Yeah.
as long as it's a research subject I'd like to continue on it and stay in academia. Ideally, I'd like to become a professor. I really love teaching as well as researching. So I hope it would be a good fit for me.
Well, it sounds to me like it would be an amazing fit for you, but also you could make some really valuable contributions, not only to community, but also to the academy, as we're still learning how to work together, community and academics. So that's great. So I have one more question for you, Shoukia, which I forgot to ask. So I'm going to ask you our fun question, and that is, if you could eat one sandwich for the rest of if you had to eat one sandwich for the rest of your life, only one kind of sandwich, what would it be?
Oh, can I be really specific?
Yes.
At Rise and Grind Cafe, there's a sandwich. It's like a breakfast sandwich with shrimp on it. It's very good. I think that would be it.
It's just shrimp?
No, it's like a breakfast sandwich. So there's like a hash brown, and I think avocado and shrimp and like tomato and lettuce and stuff.
What's it on? What kind of bun is it on, or
it's
bread?
On a lovely like brioche bun. I very much recommend it.
What's it called again?
At Rise and Grind Cafe in downtown Victoria.
Rise and Grind. Thank you. That's very helpful. Listen, Shoukia, it was really, really great meeting you. I'm really glad and grateful that you shared some of your experiences with us today. And I just wish you really all the best, and hopefully I'll see you again in another, context.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for meeting with me. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was lovely.